I'm Bernadette, 32 years old, and I'm standing in a courtroom staring at two strangers who claim to be my parents. They abandoned me at JFK Airport when I was 5, leaving me with nothing but a teddy bear and a note saying they couldn't afford me. Now they want $5.5 million from my adoptive father's inheritance. The judge is about to speak, but all I can see is that terrified little girl in the airport, wondering why mommy and daddy never came back. Before we dive into this incredible story of abandonment, betrayal, and ultimate justice, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Are you someone who's experienced family betrayal? Have you found your chosen family? Please hit that like button if you believe that real parents are the ones who stay, not the ones who leave. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of triumph over adversity. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, to that day that changed my life forever. The memory is still crystal clear, like it happened yesterday instead of 27 years ago. I was wearing my favorite pink dress with the butterflies on it, clutching Mr. Whiskers, my worn teddy bear, as we walked through JFK Airport. My biological parents, Janet and Robert, told me we were going on an adventure. I remember being excited, bouncing on my toes as we approached the food court near Terminal 4. "Sit right here, sweetheart," my mother said, her voice strangely tight as she placed me on a bench near the pizza stand. "Daddy and I need to get some snacks for the plane. You be a good girl and don't move, okay?" I nodded eagerly, swinging my legs that didn't quite reach the floor. My father ruffled my hair, but his hand was shaking. "We'll be right back," he said, and those were the last words I ever heard from him for 13 years. I waited on that bench as people rushed past, pulling suitcases and calling for taxis. After what felt like forever but was probably an hour, a nice lady in a uniform asked if I was lost. I told her my parents were getting snacks, but I was starting to feel scared. The security guards came, then the police. They found the note tucked into Mr. Whisker's vest pocket. In my mother's handwriting, it simply said, "We can't afford her anymore. Please make sure she finds a good home." Even at 5, I knew something was terribly wrong. Parents don't leave their children like forgotten luggage. The next 6 months were a blur of foster homes, social workers with sad smiles, and strange beds that smelled like other people's laundry. I went through 4 different homes in that time. The first family had too many kids already and couldn't handle another one who woke up screaming for her mommy. The second home had a mean older boy who pulled my hair and told me my parents threw me away like garbage. The third family was kind but temporary, only keeping kids for a few weeks at a time. By the fourth home, I had stopped talking altogether. I just held Mr. Whiskers and stared out windows, watching cars pass and wondering if one of them might be my parents coming back for me. Then David Whitmore walked into the children's center where I was staying temporarily between homes. He was 52 years old, a successful businessman who had never married or had children of his own. He later told me he came to volunteer that day because he was feeling lonely and thought helping kids might fill some void in his life. He was reading stories to a group of younger children when I crept to the edge of the circle, still clutching Mr. Whiskers. "Would you like to join us?" he asked gently. I shook my head but didn't run away. After the story, he sat next to me in silence for almost an hour. Finally, he said, "I like your bear. What's his name?" That was the first time I'd spoken in weeks when I whispered, "Mr. Whiskers." David visited me every day for 2 months. He never pushed, never demanded I talk or smile or be anything other than a scared, abandoned little girl. He brought books and would read them whether I responded or not. He brought building blocks and would create towers, letting me knock them down if I wanted. Slowly, I started to trust him. I began to speak more, even smiled when he made Mr. Whiskers do a silly dance. When he asked if I'd like to come live with him, I remember asking, "Forever?" He knelt down to my level and said, "Forever and always. I promise you'll never be abandoned again." The adoption process took another 4 months, but David was determined. His big house in Westchester felt like a castle after the cramped foster homes. I had my own room painted in any color I wanted. I chose yellow because David said it was the color of sunshine and new beginnings. He enrolled me in therapy to help with the trauma, found the best schools, and most importantly, he kept his promise. When I had nightmares about airport benches and parents who never came back, he would sit with me until I fell asleep again. When I panicked in crowded places that reminded me of that terminal, he'd take me somewhere quiet and remind me I was safe. School was challenging at first. I was behind academically and socially. The other kids had families with 2 parents, siblings, normal lives. I had an older adoptive father and a teddy bear I still couldn't sleep without. But David never made me feel different or less than. He attended every school event, helped with homework he had to relearn himself, and celebrated every small victory. When I got interested in building things, he set up a workshop in the garage where we spent weekends creating birdhouses, dollhouse furniture, and eventually more complex projects. "You have an architect's mind," he told me when I was 12, after I designed and built a miniature version of our house. By the time I reached high school, I had bloomed under David's patient love. I excelled in math and art, the perfect combination for architecture. I had friends, though I was always careful about letting people too close. The abandonment wound never fully heals, you just learn to build around it. David understood this. He never tried to replace my biological parents or make me forget them. Instead, he helped me understand that their choice was about their failings, not mine. "Some people," he said during one of our late-night talks when I was 16, "simply aren't capable of putting someone else's needs before their own. That doesn't diminish your worth one bit." I graduated high school with honors and got accepted to Cornell's architecture program. The night before I left for college, David gave me a new charm for the bracelet he'd given me for my 6th birthday. It was a small silver house. "No matter where you go," he said, "you'll always have a home with me." I cried then, really cried, for the first time in years. Not from sadness but from the overwhelming gratitude that this man had chosen me when the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had walked away. As I packed Mr. Whiskers carefully in my dorm room box, I realized that sometimes the family you choose, or who chooses you, is more real than the one you're born into. Little did I know that my biological parents were about to test that theory in ways I never imagined. I was 18, just finishing my first semester at Cornell, when the Facebook message appeared. The name Janet Morrison made my blood run cold before I even opened it. "My sweet Bernadette," it began, "I've been searching for you for 13 years. Not a day has passed that I haven't thought about you, cried for you, prayed to find you again. I know you must hate me, but please, give me a chance to explain. Your father and I were desperate. We were about to be homeless. We thought you'd have a better life without us dragging you down. It was the hardest decision we ever made, but we did it out of love." My hands shook as I read and reread the message. Then came the friend request, and against my better judgment, I clicked on her profile. There she was, older but unmistakable. The same dark hair, now streaked with gray. The same green eyes that I saw in my own mirror. The photos showed a normal life, a modest house, 2 children who looked about 10 and 12, a husband who was definitely my biological father, Robert. They looked happy. They looked like a family. A family that didn't include me. I called David immediately, barely able to speak through my tears. He drove 3 hours to Cornell that night, bringing hot chocolate and tissues. We sat in my dorm room as I showed him the message. He read it carefully, his face neutral. "How do you feel?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Angry. Confused. Curious. Scared. Everything all at once." He nodded thoughtfully. "Those are all valid feelings. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" We talked until dawn, David playing devil's advocate, helping me examine every angle. Finally, he said, "Whatever you decide, I support you. But Bernadette, people don't change that much. Be careful. Guard your heart." I spent 2 weeks crafting my response. I asked questions about why they left me, what had happened since, why they were contacting me now. Janet's replies came quickly, each one more emotional than the last. She painted a picture of job losses, medical bills, and impossible choices. Robert had been laid off from the factory. She'd been pregnant again and couldn't work. They had no family to help, no resources. We thought if we left you somewhere safe, you'd be adopted by people who could give you everything we couldn't. We planned to come back for you when things got better, but by then, you were gone, adopted, and they wouldn't tell us where. The story had holes big enough to drive a truck through. If they were so poor, how did they afford plane tickets? Why leave me at an airport instead of a fire station or hospital? How did they have 2 more kids if they couldn't afford one? But the abandoned child in me wanted to believe, wanted there to be a good reason why my parents had thrown me away. David watched me struggle, offering support without pushing his opinions. If you need to meet them to find closure, he said, then do it. But take someone with you. Don't go alone. The meeting was set for a restaurant in Manhattan, neutral ground. I arrived early with my college roommate, Sarah, who knew my story and offered to be my backup. My biological parents walked in looking nervous but well-dressed. Not rich, but certainly not destitute. Janet cried when she saw me, reaching out as if to hug me before pulling back. Robert stood awkwardly, his hands in his pockets. We sat across from each other, the weight of 13 years between us. You look just like your grandmother, Janet said softly. She passed 5 years ago. She never knew we found you. They talked for an hour, filling in the gaps of their lives. The other children, Mark and Lisa, who they'd told I was a cousin who lived far away. Robert's new job in construction. Janet's work at a daycare, which struck me as ironic. They asked about my life, marveling at my success, my college acceptance, my plans to become an architect. We always knew you were special, Robert said. Even as a little girl, you were so bright. I wanted to scream that if I was so special, why did they leave me? But I just nodded, sipping water to keep my hands busy. Then the red flags started. Subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Questions about my adoptive father, what he did for work, where we lived. Comments about college being expensive, architecture school being even more so. Janet mentioned their car needed repairs they couldn't afford. Robert talked about Mark needing braces. By the time our food arrived, mostly untouched, they'd painted a clear picture of ongoing financial struggles. We're not asking for anything, Janet said quickly, seeing my expression. We just want to be part of your life again. Family helps family, right? I excused myself to the bathroom, where Sarah found me crying. They want money, I said, the truth bitter on my tongue. They found out I have a rich adoptive father and they want money. Sarah hugged me tightly. You don't owe them anything, she reminded me. Nothing at all. When I returned to the table, I made a decision. I pulled out my checkbook, David's lessons about helping others echoing in my mind. I can give you $5,000, I said quietly. To help with the car and Mark's braces. But that's all, and I need time to process everything else. The transformation was instant. Janet's tears dried up. Robert's face hardened. 5,000, he repeated. Bernadette, we're your parents. We gave you life. Don't you think after everything we've been through, everything we've sacrificed? I stood up, my legs shaky but my voice firm. You sacrificed me. You left me on a bench in an airport. I was 5 years old and you walked away. The man who raised me, who never abandoned me, he taught me to be generous. This is me being generous. Take it or leave it. They took it, of course. Janet hugged me, whispering about staying in touch, being a family again. I nodded, knowing I would never answer another message. As Sarah and I left, I heard Robert mutter to Janet, I told you we should have asked for more. That's when the last piece of my childhood hope died. They hadn't contacted me because they loved me or missed me. They'd seen my life on social media and wanted a piece of it. David wasn't surprised when I told him. He held me while I cried out 13 years of abandonment issues in one night. Then he made a call to his private investigator. "I want to know everything about Janet and Robert Morrison," he said. Everything. What came back 2 weeks later confirmed our worst fears and then some. They hadn't been poor when they abandoned me. Robert had inherited $30,000 from his uncle 6 months before. They'd used it to travel across Europe for a year, footloose and fancy-free. The pregnancy with Mark had brought them back to reality, but by then, I was already adopted. The investigator found blog posts Janet had written on a now-defunct website about child-free living and how they'd made the hard choice to pursue their dreams. There were photos of them in Paris 2 weeks after they'd left me, raising champagne glasses. The caption read, "To new beginnings and freedom." I stared at those photos for hours, trying to reconcile the smiling couple with the story of desperate parents making an impossible choice. The truth was simpler and crueler. They'd wanted to see the world, and a 5-year-old daughter didn't fit those plans. I sent them one final message. "I know the truth about Europe, about the inheritance, about everything. Don't contact me again. The $5,000 is all you'll ever get from me. I hope it was worth it." Janet tried calling, leaving voicemails about misunderstandings and how the investigator got it wrong. Robert sent emails threatening legal action for defamation. But eventually, they stopped. They'd gotten what they came for, and I'd gotten my closure. The parents I'd idealized in my mind, the ones who must have had a good reason, they'd never existed. But the father who raised me, who'd warned me to guard my heart. He was real, and he was waiting at home with hot chocolate and open arms. Sometimes that's enough. Actually, that's everything. Architecture became my sanctuary after the disastrous reunion with my biological parents. I threw myself into my studies with newfound determination, as if every perfect angle and calculated stress point could somehow restructure the chaos of my past. David attended every presentation, every award ceremony, beaming with pride as I collected honor after honor. When I graduated summa cum laude from Cornell, he was there in the front row, tears streaming down his face. "Your parents don't know what they missed," he whispered as he hugged me. "Their loss is my incredible gain." I joined Hartwell and Associates, one of Manhattan's most prestigious firms, starting at the bottom like everyone else despite David's connections. He'd offered to make calls, but I wanted to earn my place. The first year was brutal with 100-hour weeks, coffee-stained blueprints, and senior architects who seemed determined to break the newbies. But I'd been broken before and survived. This was nothing compared to being abandoned in an airport. Every challenge just made me work harder, stay later, push further. My childhood trauma had given me something unexpected, resilience that my privileged colleagues couldn't match. By my 3rd year, I was lead architect on smaller projects. By my 5th, I was designing multi-million-dollar residential complexes. My signature style emerged. Buildings that felt like home, with unexpected cozy spaces tucked into modern structures. "You design like someone who understands the importance of feeling safe," a client once told me, unknowingly hitting closer to truth than she realized. David kept every magazine that featured my work, creating a scrapbook that he'd show anyone who stood still long enough. The International Architecture Conference in Chicago changed everything. I was presenting on emotional architecture. Building homes, not just houses, when I noticed a man in the 3rd row actually taking notes, not just politely pretending to pay attention. After my talk, he approached with intelligent questions about my philosophy of incorporating childhood comfort elements into modern design. His name was James Chen, a structural engineer whose adoptive parents had found him at a fire station when he was 2 days old. "You get it," he said over coffee that turned into lunch that turned into dinner. The need to build something permanent when your foundation started so shaky. Our relationship developed with the careful precision of 2 people who understood abandonment. We took things slowly, both terrified of being left again. David loved James immediately, recognizing a kindred spirit who understood the complexities of our non-traditional family. He looks at you the way I imagine I looked at you that first day at the children's center, David told me after their first meeting. Like he's found something precious he didn't know he was searching for. James's adoptive parents, Korean immigrants who'd built a successful restaurant chain, welcomed me with the same warmth. Our wedding was a testament to chosen families, with 4 proud parents in the front row and not a biological relative in sight. Grace was born 2 years later, followed by Michael 18 months after that. David transformed into the grandfather he was born to be, building elaborate playsets in our backyard and teaching them woodworking as soon as they could hold sandpaper. Watching him with my children healed something in me. This was what parental love looked like, consistent, present, unconditional. He never missed a recital, a baseball game, or a bedtime story when he babysat. These children will never doubt they're loved, he told me once, watching them sleep. Never wonder if they're worth staying for. My career soared alongside my growing family. The Riverside Community Center, my first major solo project, won 3 international awards. It was built specifically for at-risk youth, with spaces designed to feel safe and nurturing. The therapy rooms had natural light and soft corners. The common areas felt like living rooms, not institutions. David spoke at the opening ceremony, his voice breaking when he talked about how one volunteer afternoon had changed both our lives. My daughter builds more than buildings, he said. She builds hope. Then my biological parents reappeared on social media like ghosts I couldn't block fast enough. They'd been watching, of course. Every article about my work, every family photo James posted, every milestone they'd missed by choice. The messages started subtle. Janet commenting on a public photo of Grace's birthday party with "She looks just like you did at that age." Robert sharing my firm's announcement about the Riverside Center with "So proud of what you've accomplished." I ignored them, but the intrusions felt like tiny paper cuts, reminders that they were still out there, still watching, still believing they had some claim to my life. My half-siblings reached out through Instagram when Mark was 22 and Lisa was 20. Their messages were different, tentative and apologetic. "We just found out you're actually our sister, not our cousin," Mark wrote. "Mom and Dad lied to us our whole lives. We're so sorry. We had no idea what they did to you." Late-night video calls revealed 2 young adults struggling with their own sense of betrayal. They'd grown up with parents who could abandon a child and lie about it for decades. What else had they lied about? I helped them understand the truth gently, sharing the investigation reports when they asked. They were horrified by the Europe photos, the blog posts, the evidence of calculated abandonment. Lisa cried for hours. Mark punched a wall, then apologized profusely. They'd grown up with financial instability that now made sense, parents who'd blown an inheritance on travel instead of securing their family's future. I maintained careful boundaries but offered support. They were victims too, in their way. We built a tentative relationship based on shared DNA and mutual wariness of the people who'd raised us. David's first cancer diagnosis came like a thunderbolt on a clear day. Pancreatic, but caught early. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, and it went into remission. But we both knew the statistics. He updated his will immediately, setting up trusts for Grace and Michael, ensuring my biological parents could never touch a penny. "I need to know you're protected," he said during one of his chemo sessions. "That they can't hurt you when I'm gone." I held his hand, unable to imagine a world without him in it. The remission lasted 3 beautiful years. We traveled together, the whole family exploring places David had always wanted to see. He taught Grace advanced woodworking techniques and helped Michael with his science fair projects. He walked me through every detail of his business holdings, ensuring I understood everything. "You're not just my daughter," he said. "You're my legacy. Everything I've built continues through you." The cancer returned with a vengeance just after Grace's 8th birthday. This time, we all knew what was coming. Those final months were a gift and a torture. David spent every possible moment with us, creating memory boxes for the children, recording videos for future milestones he'd miss. He walked me through photo albums, sharing stories about his life before me, the loneliness that had driven him to that children's center. "You saved me as much as I saved you," he insisted. "You gave my life meaning, purpose, joy I never knew I was missing." He made me promise to keep building, keep creating homes for people who needed them. The last time he updated his will, he held my hand and said, "They'll come for you when I'm gone. Be ready." David passed on a Tuesday morning in April, holding my hand as sunrise painted his hospital room gold. His last words were, "Take care of each other." The funeral felt like a state occasion with hundreds of people whose lives he'd touched. Business associates, charity recipients, childhood friends, and dozens of children now grown who'd lived in the youth centers he'd funded. Grace and Michael placed drawings in his casket. James held me as I gave the eulogy, my voice steady until I reached the part about him keeping his promise to never abandon me. Then I broke, and the entire chapel wept with me. The reading of David's will was scheduled for the following week. I knew the basics but insisted on the formal reading with all beneficiaries present. He'd left generous amounts to various charities, set up educational trusts for Grace and Michael, and provided for his longtime employees. The bulk of his estate, including his business holdings and personal assets totaling $5.5 million after taxes and charitable donations, went to me. But it was the conditions attached that showed his foresight, ironclad provisions that the inheritance was mine alone, protected from any claims by biological relatives, with specific language excluding any persons who voluntarily relinquished parental rights or abandoned the beneficiary. I was still in the lawyer's office when my phone buzzed. Janet. Then Robert. Then unknown numbers that turned out to be their friends. The news of David's death and my inheritance had traveled fast. I didn't answer, but the voicemails piled up. Condolences that sounded practiced. Offers to be there for me during this difficult time. Suggestions that family should come together in times of grief. I deleted them all, focusing on the mountain of paperwork that comes with inheriting an estate. The funeral was on a Saturday. My biological parents showed up at the reception afterward, dressed in black like mourners who'd lost someone dear. The audacity took my breath away. They'd never met David, the man who'd raised their abandoned daughter. Janet approached first, arms outstretched for a hug I sidestepped. "Bernadette, sweetheart, we're so sorry for your loss. We know how much he meant to you." Robert stood beside her, trying to look appropriately somber. "If there's anything we can do, anything at all. Family supports family in times like these." James intercepted before I could respond, his engineer's mind already calculating the angles. "I think Bernadette needs space right now. This is a private family gathering." The emphasis on family wasn't subtle. Mark and Lisa were there, having driven up to pay their respects to the man they'd never met but who'd saved their sister. They looked as uncomfortable as I felt seeing our biological parents there. The four of us had built something real over the years, bonded by our shared understanding of who Janet and Robert really were. Mark actually stepped between Robert and me when he tried to approach again. I made it through the reception, accepting condolences and sharing David's stories, while my biological parents lurked on the edges like vultures waiting for the mourners to leave. Finally, James's father, a man who'd survived the Korean War and took no nonsense, walked up to them. "You dishonor this gathering," he said quietly but firmly. "The man who raised your thrown-away daughter is dead. Have you no shame?" They left, but I knew they'd be back. David had been right. They'd come for me when he was gone. Monday morning, the legal notice arrived by certified mail. My biological parents were suing me for their rightful share of David's estate based on parental rights and emotional damages caused by forced separation. The language was laughably formal for something so grotesque. They claimed that as my biological parents, they were entitled to consideration in any inheritance I received. They cited their years of suffering and financial hardship caused by the traumatic loss of their daughter. The number they demanded was precise. $2.75 million, exactly half of my inheritance. My lawyer, Harrison Finch, actually laughed when I showed him the lawsuit. In 30 years of practice, this might be the most baseless claim I've ever seen. They abandoned you. There's documented proof. They have no legal standing whatsoever. But his amusement faded as he read further. They've hired Kruger and Associates. Bottom feeders, but clever ones. They'll try to make this a media circus, force a settlement to make it go away. He was right. By that evening, carefully planted stories appeared online. Adoptive father's fortune tears family apart and biological parents fight for recognition in daughter's inheritance. The narrative they spun was masterful in its manipulation. They painted themselves as young, desperate parents who'd made an impossible choice to give their daughter a better life. They claimed they'd been coerced into abandoning me, that the adoption had been rushed through without proper consideration of their rights. Janet gave tearful interviews about searching for me for years, being denied access by my wealthy adoptive father. Robert played the supportive husband, standing strong beside his suffering wife. They never mentioned Europe, the inheritance they'd blown, or the blog posts celebrating their child-free adventure. My phone rang constantly with reporters seeking comment. My firm received calls asking if I was the architect who abandoned her parents. Grace came home from school crying because a classmate said I was mean to my real mommy and daddy. The principal had to send a letter to all parents explaining that harassment of students regarding personal family matters wouldn't be tolerated. James installed security cameras after we caught photographers trying to get pictures of our children. The life David and I had built was under assault by the very people who'd thrown me away like garbage. The preliminary hearing was set for 6 weeks out. Harrison assembled a team, warning me this would get uglier before it got better. They're counting on you settling to protect your family and reputation. We need to show them you won't be bullied. I authorized him to hire investigators, subpoena records, whatever it took. David had left me the resources to fight, and I wouldn't dishonor his memory by giving in to the people he'd protected me from my entire life. My half-siblings were caught in the middle, pressured by our parents to support their case. Lisa called me sobbing one night. They want us to testify that you've deprived them of a relationship with their grandchildren. That you've poisoned us against them. Dad says if we don't help, we're out of the will. I told her to protect herself, that I understood whatever decision she made. But both she and Mark refused to participate in the lawsuit, fracturing their relationship with our parents even further. As the hearing approached, Janet and Robert escalated their media campaign. They released childhood photos of me they'd apparently kept, positioning themselves as grieving parents clutching precious memories. They found distant relatives to vouch for their character, people who didn't know about the abandonment. They even produced a therapist who testified about adoption trauma and the primal wound of separation from biological parents, conveniently ignoring that they'd caused that wound by choice. The public opinion war was brutal, with social media taking sides. Hashtags like #JusticeForJanet competed with #AbandonedAt5. My architectural work became secondary to my identity as the woman whose parents left her in an airport. The stress began affecting everything. I couldn't focus on designs, seeing airport terminals in every blueprint. Grace had nightmares about being left somewhere. Michael got into a fight defending me from a bully who'd hurt his parents discussing the case. James and I fought for the first time in years when I suggested just paying them off to make it stop. That's not what David would want, he said firmly. He spent your entire life making sure they couldn't hurt you again. Don't let them win now. He was right, but I was so tired. Grief for David mixed with rage at my biological parents until I could barely breathe. They'd taken my childhood, and now they wanted to rob me of properly mourning the only real parent I'd ever known. The first court hearing arrived with the kind of media attention usually reserved for celebrity divorces. Reporters lined the courthouse steps as Harrison guided me through the crowd, their questions like arrows. Bernadette, why won't you share with your birth parents? Don't you think they deserve something? How can you be so cold? James flanked my other side while Mark and Lisa followed behind, their presence a silent statement of support that would cost them dearly at home. Inside the courtroom, my biological parents sat with their legal team, Janet dabbing at her eyes with a tissue while Robert rubbed her back. Their lawyer, Sheila Kruger, looked like a shark in a designer suit. She'd built her career on emotional manipulation disguised as legal argument. Harrison had warned me she'd go for the heartstrings, try to make me look like an ungrateful daughter hoarding wealth while her poor parents suffered. Kruger's opening statement was a masterpiece of twisted truth. She painted Janet and Robert as victims of circumstance, young parents overwhelmed by poverty who made the ultimate sacrifice to ensure their daughter's well-being. They didn't abandon Bernadette, she declared. They delivered her to a better life, always intending to reunite when circumstances improved. The adoption was processed with unseemly haste, denying them the chance to reconsider once their situation stabilized. She actually used the phrase illegal adoption, making Harrison object so forcefully the judge had to call for order. When Kruger presented her evidence, I watched my life get rewritten in real time. Financial records showing my biological parents' poverty conveniently started after their European trip. The blog posts about child-free living were dismissed as grief-driven attempts to justify an impossible decision. Janet took the stand first, sobbing through a rehearsed testimony about sleepless nights and endless searching for her stolen daughter. She claimed the note they'd left was meant to be temporary, that they'd planned to return within days but I'd already vanished into the system. The cross-examination should have destroyed her credibility. Harrison presented the security footage from JFK, time-stamped to show they'd left me for over 3 hours before anyone found me. He showed their flight records to Paris 2 days later, paid for with cash from Robert's inheritance. He even had the original police report where they'd told officers they were heading to California for work when questioned at their apartment. But Janet had an answer for everything. The tickets were non-refundable, purchased before they knew I'd be taken so quickly. They went to Europe to grieve, not celebrate. The police misunderstood their explanation. Every damaging fact got twisted into evidence of their suffering. Robert's testimony was worse because he was a better actor. No tears, just a broken man describing the worst decision of his life. He admitted to the inheritance but claimed medical bills for Janet's nervous breakdown after losing me had drained it. He spoke of years of therapy, medication, the strain on their marriage. When Kruger asked why they'd had more children, he said, "We were trying to fill the hole Bernadette left." But you can't replace a child. Mark and Lisa grew up in the shadow of their missing sister. I wanted to vomit. They'd told their other children I was a distant cousin until forced to admit the truth. The media ate it up. Hashtag Janet and Robert deserve better started trending. Their supporters gathered outside the courthouse with signs reading "Biology matters" and "Adoptive privilege is real." Someone leaked my architectural portfolio online with nasty comments about how I'd rather build houses for strangers than help my real family. Grace's school had to implement new security measures after someone tried to approach her at recess claiming to be her real grandmother. The principal called me immediately, but the damage was done. My 8-year-old now knew that some people thought Grandpa David wasn't her real grandfather. Harrison's presentation of our evidence felt like watching truth battle fiction in real time. The security footage was clear, but Kruger argued it showed parents in crisis, not callous abandonment. The Europe photos were taken out of context, grief-stricken parents trying to escape their pain. The blog posts were misinterpreted, written by a woman struggling with mental health issues. Every piece of evidence we presented got filtered through a lens of sympathy the judge seemed increasingly willing to apply. Then came the character witnesses. Janet and Robert had coached a parade of friends and relatives who testified to their good character, their charity work, their devotion to Mark and Lisa. Never mind that most of this charity work started after they'd Googled me and discovered my success. The narrative was building. Reformed parents who'd made one terrible mistake versus a wealthy daughter too selfish to forgive. Harrison objected repeatedly to the emotional manipulation, but the damage was accumulating. My biological parents' media strategy intensified outside the courtroom. They gave exclusive interviews to morning shows, Janet crying on command while Robert held her hand. They released more childhood photos, including one of me on my 5th birthday just weeks before the abandonment. "Look how happy she was," Janet sobbed on national television. "We gave her that happiness. Doesn't that count for something?" They never mentioned that 2 weeks after that photo, they'd left that happy child on an airport bench. The investigation into their finances revealed the depths of their desperation. They'd borrowed heavily to hire Kruger, maxing out credit cards and taking loans against their house. This lawsuit wasn't just about greed, it was their Hail Mary to avoid bankruptcy. They'd failed at multiple business ventures over the years, always looking for the quick score rather than steady work. The pattern was clear: they'd abandoned me for a year of freedom, blown through an inheritance, and now saw my inheritance as their next windfall. Mark and Lisa faced increasing pressure at home as the trial continued. Lisa called me one night, whispering because Janet was in the next room. She says if we don't support them in court, we're traitors like you. Dad threw Mark's college diploma in the trash, said it meant nothing if he wouldn't stand by family. I urged them to protect themselves, but they appeared in court the next day anyway, sitting firmly on my side of the gallery. The look Janet gave them could have frozen hell. Kruger's next move was bringing in expert witnesses on adoption trauma and biological bonds. A psychologist testified about the primal wound adoption causes, how biological parents suffer lifelong trauma from separation. Another expert discussed genetic bewilderment and how adoptees often struggle with identity issues that financial support from biological parents could help address. It was manipulative pseudoscience designed to make the judge consider emotions over law, and it was working. The turning point came when Kruger argued for a continuance to gather more evidence. She claimed to have leads on irregularities in my adoption process, suggesting David had used his wealth to circumvent proper procedures. It was a lie, but it would drag the case out for months, increasing legal fees and media attention. Harrison fought it, but the judge granted a 60-day extension. As we left the courthouse, Janet actually smiled at me. Not a nice smile. A predator's smile that said she knew I was weakening. That night, James found me in Grace's room, watching her sleep. "We could end this," I whispered. "Give them something. Not what they're asking, but enough to make them go away." He sat beside me, taking my hand. "You know what Grace asked me today? She asked if Grandpa David was really her grandpa since he wasn't your real dad. They're poisoning everything he was to us. Everything he built. That's what they want, you know. Not just money. They want to erase him, make themselves the center of your story again." He was right. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about legacy, about truth, about protecting the man who'd saved me from the people trying to claim me now. Harrison Finch called me at 6 in the morning, his voice electric with excitement. "We got it," he said simply. "The smoking gun. My investigator found something that changes everything." Within an hour, I was in his office, staring at a DVD labeled European Dreams, A Year of Freedom. It was a documentary that had aired on a small travel channel 15 years ago, featuring couples who'd taken gap years to travel. Janet and Robert were episode 3. The footage was damning beyond our wildest hopes. There they were, tanned and laughing on a beach in Greece, raising glasses to the camera. "People always ask if we miss anything about our old life," Janet said, her words slightly slurred from wine. "But honestly, when you're free to chase your dreams, you don't look back." Robert's arm was around her as he added, "We made a tough choice, but it was the right one. Some people aren't meant for the traditional path, you know? We ditched the kid and hit the road. Best decision we ever made." The interviewer laughed uncomfortably and tried to change the subject, but Janet continued, "She's probably better off anyway. We weren't parent material. Still aren't." Harrison had 3 copies made immediately, plus digital backups. "They can't claim this was edited or taken out of context. It's professionally produced, time-stamped, with their full participation." He also had the producer's signed affidavit confirming the footage was authentic and unedited. The documentary had been removed from circulation years ago when the channel folded, but the producer kept archives. Our investigator had tracked him down in Portland, where he ran a small production company. We decided not to reveal the footage until the perfect moment. Let them continue their media tour, their sob story about desperate young parents. Let them dig their hole deeper with every tearful interview. Harrison filed routine motions, keeping everything normal while we prepared for the nuclear option. Meanwhile, their financial situation deteriorated. Kruger demanded another payment, threatening to withdraw if they couldn't pay. They borrowed from loan sharks, sold their car, maxed out every possible credit line. The resumed hearing drew even more media attention. Kruger came out swinging with her evidence of adoption irregularities. She'd found a clerical error in the paperwork, a date transposed by a tired clerk. It meant nothing legally, but she spun it into a conspiracy theory about David using influence to push through an illegal adoption. She painted him as a wealthy predator who'd stolen a child from desperate parents. I gripped James's hand so hard I left marks. Then Kruger made a critical mistake. Confident in her narrative, she asked the judge to admit character evidence about my biological parents' reformation and growth since their mistake. She wanted to show they'd become model citizens, devoted parents to their other children, pillars of their community. Harrison agreed immediately, barely concealing his smile. The judge approved, opening the door we'd been waiting for. Janet took the stand again, describing their charity work, their involvement in Mark and Lisa's schools, their church attendance. She spoke about counseling other parents in crisis, helping them find resources instead of making desperate choices. If we'd known then what we know now, she said tearfully, we never would have left Bernadette. We've spent 27 years trying to atone for those 3 hours of desperation. The gallery was silent, some spectators wiping away tears. Even the judge looked moved. Harrison stood slowly for cross-examination. Mrs. Morrison, you've spoken eloquently about your transformation. Tell me, when did this transformation begin? Janet launched into a prepared speech about therapy and finding faith. Harrison let her talk, then asked, was it before or after your year-long trip to Europe? The question hung in the air. Janet stumbled, saying the trip was part of their healing process. I see, Harrison said. And during this healing process, did you participate in any documentaries about your travels? Kruger objected, calling it irrelevant. Harrison argued it went directly to character and reformation timeline. The judge allowed it. Janet claimed not to remember any documentaries. Harrison presented the release forms she and Robert had signed, their signatures clear as day. Does this refresh your memory? Janet's face went pale. She admitted to vaguely remembering some small interview but insisted it wasn't important. That's when Harrison introduced the DVD into evidence. The courtroom was silent as the footage played on the large screen. Janet's wine-flushed face filled the display as her recorded voice echoed through the room, we ditched the kid and hit the road. Best decision we ever made. Someone in the gallery gasped. Mark and Lisa stared at their parents in horror. The judge's sympathetic expression transformed into disgust. Robert started to stand, maybe to run, but his lawyer pulled him down. On screen, past Janet laughed about not being parent material, toasting to their child-free adventure. When the footage ended, you could hear a pin drop. Harrison let the silence stretch before asking, Mrs. Morrison, does this sound like a woman in crisis? A desperate mother who'd just made an impossible choice? Janet opened her mouth but no words came. Kruger jumped up, objecting to everything she could think of, but the damage was done. The judge overruled every objection, his eyes never leaving my biological parents' faces. Harrison wasn't finished. He presented customs records showing they'd spent lavishly during their trip. Restaurant receipts from 5-star establishments while their abandoned daughter sat in foster care. Hotel bills that could have paid rent for a year. Credit card records showing purchases of designer clothes and jewelry. Where was the poverty, Mrs. Morrison? Where was the desperation that forced you to abandon your 5-year-old daughter in an airport? The media's reaction was instant and brutal. Hashtag ditched the kid began trending within minutes. The same morning shows that had sympathetically interviewed them played the footage on repeat. The crowds outside switched from supporting Janet and Robert to demanding justice for me. Someone found and reposted the old blog entries about child-free living that we'd discovered years ago. The narrative collapsed completely. They weren't desperate parents who'd made an impossible choice. They were selfish people who'd thrown away their child for a year of fun. Kruger tried damage control, arguing the documentary was youthful bravado and shouldn't overshadow their current reformation. But more evidence poured in. The private investigator had been thorough. Loan applications where they'd claimed no dependents while I was in foster care. Tax returns where they'd tried to claim me as a deduction years after abandoning me. A pattern of lies and manipulation that extended far beyond one terrible decision. Robert finally took the stand, abandoning the Grieving Father Act for angry defiance. He blamed the documentary producers for getting them drunk, claimed the footage was edited to make them look bad. When Harrison showed him the unedited footage that was actually worse, he switched tactics. Yes, they'd left me. Yes, they'd traveled. But wasn't I better off? Look how successful I'd become. Shouldn't I be grateful they'd given me the chance for a better life? So you're saying, Harrison clarified, that abandoning your daughter was actually a gift to her? Robert realized his mistake too late. He tried to backtrack, but Harrison pressed on. You chose a year of vacation over raising your child, and now you want to be rewarded for it? The judge actually leaned forward, waiting for the answer. Robert's response sealed their fate. We gave her to someone who wanted her. That should count for something. Not remorse. Not shame. Just entitlement. Mark and Lisa left the courtroom in tears. Lisa later told me it was like watching strangers wear their parents' faces. Everything made sense now. The financial instability, the lies, the emotional manipulation. They'd grown up with people capable of abandoning a child and laughing about it on camera. The golden child narrative their parents had constructed around their missing sister was just another manipulation, a tool to control them through guilt. The judge called a recess, but the case was effectively over. Kruger requested a private conference, probably to discuss withdrawal. Janet and Robert sat alone at their table as their supporters melted away. The documentary footage had already gone viral, paired with my original abandonment story. News outlets that had championed their cause issued retractions and apologies. The public that had been manipulated into sympathizing with them turned with a vengeance. The judge's ruling came 2 weeks later, delivered in a packed courtroom to complete silence. This court has rarely seen a case that so fundamentally violates the principles of parental responsibility and human decency, he began, his voice carrying the weight of genuine disgust. Janet and Robert Morrison abandoned their 5-year-old daughter in an airport to pursue a year of leisure travel. They showed no remorse at the time, indeed celebrating their decision on camera. Now, 27 years later, they seek to profit from that abandonment by claiming rights to an inheritance left by the man who actually raised their discarded child. He continued for 20 minutes, systematically dismantling every argument Kruger had made. The adoption was legal and binding. Abandonment eliminated any residual parental rights. The attempt to claim inheritance based on biological connection was legally baseless and morally reprehensible. He dismissed the case with prejudice, meaning they could never refile. Then he went further, ordering Janet and Robert to pay all my legal fees, noting their bad faith litigation and attempt to manipulate both the court and public opinion. The aftermath was swift. The IRS opened an investigation into the tax fraud we'd uncovered. The district attorney's office began reviewing potential criminal charges for abandonment and fraud. Janet and Robert fled the state within a week, leaving behind a house in foreclosure and debts they'd never pay. Their relationship with Mark and Lisa was destroyed beyond repair. My half-siblings chose truth over the parents who'd raised them on lies. I used part of David's inheritance to establish the Whitmore Foundation for Abandoned Children. The announcement came with a press release that told my full story, from airport bench to courtroom victory. Donations poured in from people who'd followed the case, turning my personal pain into something that could help other abandoned children. The foundation's first project was a residential facility designed with all my architectural knowledge about creating spaces that feel safe for traumatized children. The building's opening ceremony brought together hundreds of supporters. Mark and Lisa stood with James and our children. Our family unit reformed around truth instead of lies. Grace cut the ribbon with scissors David had given her from his workshop. Michael read a poem about chosen families. The center's main gathering space was named the David Whitmore Hall, with his portrait watching over children who needed what he'd given me, unconditional love and a second chance. My biological parents tried one last manipulation 6 months later. A letter arrived through their latest lawyer, offering to formally apologize and seek healing as a family in exchange for a modest settlement to help them restart their lives. The audacity still took my breath away. They'd learned nothing, changed nothing. Every interaction was still transactional, still about what they could extract from the child they'd thrown away. I had the letter framed and hung in my office as a reminder of how far I'd come from that scared little girl on the airport bench. I gave a speech at the foundation's first anniversary gala, standing before an audience of donors, social workers, and former abandoned children who'd found success. My biological parents gave me one gift, I said, looking at David's portrait on the wall. They left me in a place where David Whitmore could find me. Their abandonment led me to my real father, the one who chose me every day for 27 years. He used to say I saved him from loneliness, but the truth is he saved me from believing I wasn't worth keeping. The foundation grew beyond our wildest dreams. By the third year, we'd helped place over 200 abandoned children with loving families and provided support services for thousands more. Each success story felt like redemption, proof that abandonment doesn't have to define a life. The architectural firm I'd worried would drop me instead became a major supporter, with several partners joining the board. My story had transformed from liability to inspiration. I still design buildings that feel like home, but now I understand why. Every blueprint carries the ghost of that airport bench, every safety feature echoes a 5-year-old's fear. But they also carry David's workshop, his patient teaching, his absolute faith in my worth. When clients ask about my design philosophy, I tell them about building structures that can't abandon the people inside them, spaces that hold you even when the world lets you go. My children grew up knowing the full story, age-appropriately shared. They understood why some grandparents were pictures on walls while others were empty spaces in family trees. But they also understood the power of chosen family, the strength of love that's decided rather than defaulted. Grace became interested in social work, wanting to help kids like I'd been. Michael followed his grandfather into business but with a focus on social enterprise. David's values lived on through them. The last time I heard from Janet and Robert was a Facebook message from a fake account, probably sent from whatever state they'd run to. They complained about the injustice of their situation, how I'd ruined their lives with my greed and cruelty. They mentioned being homeless, probably hoping to trigger my charitable instincts. I screenshot the message and sent it to Mark and Lisa with a simple note, still choosing themselves. We laughed about it over dinner, our own chosen family stronger for having survived the truth. Standing in David's workshop, now preserved exactly as he left it, I often talk to him. I tell him about the children the foundation has helped, about Grace's acceptance to social work school, about Michael's business plan to expand the foundation internationally. I thank him for seeing past a frightened 5-year-old's walls to the daughter he decided I could be. Mostly, I thank him for keeping his promise. He said I'd never be abandoned again, and even in death, he made sure of it. The lawsuit meant to break me had instead broken the last chains binding me to the people who'd thrown me away. Their greed exposed their true nature so thoroughly that I could finally release the fantasy of parents who'd loved me but had no choice. The truth was simpler and cleaner, they'd chosen themselves, as they always had. But David had chosen me, and that choice created ripples that would help abandoned children for generations. Sometimes I drive past JFK Airport, not from pain but from perspective. That bench where my first life ended was also where my real life began. Every abandonment carries the seed of a better finding. Every loss creates space for unexpected love. My biological parents thought they were freeing themselves when they walked away from a 5-year-old me. Instead, they freed me to find a father who showed me what love actually looks like: consistent, present, protective, and permanent. Even now, especially now, forever and always. What did you think of this story? Have you ever experienced family betrayal or found your chosen family? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe that real parents are the ones who stay, not the ones who leave, please give this video a like. And if you want more stories about triumph over adversity, about people who turned their worst moments into their greatest strengths, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to hear that being thrown away doesn't mean you're worthless, it might just mean you were meant for something better. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the family that chooses you is often more real than the one you're born into. May you all find your David Whitmores in whatever form they take.